What if Prince Harry wasn't just left out, but deliberately erased? Imagine standing outside a room you thought you belonged to your entire life, only to find the door closed, locked, and no one willing to tell you why. That was reportedly the reality the younger Windsor found himself facing at the latest royal events, moments that should have been filled with family, tradition, and ceremony. But instead, they were a stark reminder of a truth no one could ignore. Even blood ties can be overridden by power, protocol, and principle. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. In the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace and the sprawling estates of Windsor, every detail matters. A seating chart isn't just about comfort, it's a statement. A whispered instruction, a glance, a subtle shift in protocol. These are the tools the monarchy wields to assert authority without ever raising a hand. And for Harry, it seems, the message was unmistakable. Your presence is no longer wanted. But this story isn't simply about one brother being excluded. It's about the quiet, almost imperceptible shifts in power that determine who belongs and who doesn't. It's about the younger generation of royals realizing that their freedom comes at a cost, and sometimes that cost is being left out in the cold, even by those who once called themselves family. What makes this exclusion different, shocking even, is the involvement of Princess Anne, a figure often underestimated by the public but feared behind closed doors. Known for her precision, discipline, and unwavering loyalty to the crown, and reportedly reached a point where she said enough, and her word may have sealed the fate of her nephew in ways the world is only now beginning to understand. Consider the emotional weight of such a moment. Harry, who spent decades navigating the intricate labyrinth of royal expectations, suddenly faced the ultimate silent rebuke. No phone call, no letter, no private meeting to soften the blow. Just absence. In the world of the monarchy, absence can speak louder than words. And in this case, it screamed. The scenes at these events, carefully orchestrated down to the placement of every guest, carried a symbolism that would not be lost on the young prince. His absence was conspicuous. The reactions of others were telling, and the silence around the decision amplified its impact. The timing couldn't have been more consequential. The monarchy is in a period of delicate transition, with younger royals stepping into roles that require not only charm and duty, but an almost ruthless understanding of legacy. Every appearance, every gesture, every public smile, or lack thereof, is meticulously calculated. And now, with Prince Harry being systematically removed from certain royal moments, the calculation becomes clear. This isn't about forgiveness or familial bonds. This is about the integrity of the crown, the narrative of the monarchy, and the careful curation of its public image. Yet, despite the cold, almost surgical precision of these moves, there's an undeniable human element. A brother once close now feels the sting of distance not as a rumor, but as lived experience. And for the public, watching from the outside, it raises uncomfortable questions. How much power does the monarchy exert over personal relationships? How does one reconcile love and duty when the two are at odds? And perhaps most provocatively, at what point does the cost of freedom become the sacrifice of connection? The intrigue deepens when we consider Princess Anne's role, often called the forgotten royal in media portrayals, and wields influence in ways the public rarely sees. She has long been the enforcer, the silent arbiter of tradition. Those who underestimate her do so at their peril. And according to reports circulating among palace insiders, it was Anne who reached a decisive moment in this unfolding drama, a moment that reportedly prompted her to issue a statement, or perhaps just a word, that would reverberate through the royal family and beyond. The power of Anne's judgment is rarely questioned, and in this case, it seems to have tipped the balance irrevocably. But why does this matter now? Why should we care about the behind-the-scenes maneuverings of a family steeped in centuries of history and protocol? Because the consequences ripple far beyond one dinner, one ceremony, or one royal outing. The decisions made in these moments shape the public perception of the monarchy for decades to come. They inform who is seen as loyal, who is trusted, and who is potentially expendable. And when those decisions involve Harry, a figure who has already made headlines for challenging tradition, the stakes are exponentially higher. To fully appreciate the gravity, Imagine being in Harry's shoes, raised to respect tradition, yet always conscious of the weight of expectation, adored by millions, yet scrutinized by the very family that should be his refuge. Publicly, he projects confidence and resilience, but privately, he faces the raw emotional reality of rejection. This is not simply a story about exclusion. It is a story about the collision of love, duty, and the unforgiving nature of power. And there's an added layer of drama. This is not merely about one prince being excluded. It is about a coordinated, almost strategic orchestration that signals to everyone watching. Rules exist, and even the closest of family must abide. William's approach, measured yet firm, and Anne's decisive stance, create a scenario where mercy is not offered, and negotiation seems futile. It's the stark difference between public reconciliation narratives and private enforcement of boundaries. The contrast is striking. On one hand, there's the media-driven story of brotherly tension and public statements. On the other, there is the raw, intimate reality of power being exercised in ways the cameras will never capture. What makes this situation even more compelling is the subtlety with which these decisions are implemented. No dramatic announcements. No palace press release condemning behavior. Just a series of choices. Who sits where, who receives what invitation, who is acknowledged, and who is not. The meticulous orchestration demonstrates an understanding that perception is as critical as action. To be excluded from a ceremony in the public eye is to have your relevance questioned. And that is precisely the psychological weight being applied here. Yet, as we begin to peel back the layers, the story becomes not just one of exclusion, but of strategy, legacy, and human emotion. What happens when a brother realizes that, despite past bonds, the future narrative is being rewritten without his input? How does one reconcile love for family with the acknowledgement that family may no longer extend mercy? These questions are not merely rhetorical. They are central to understanding the unfolding drama at the heart of this story. And if you think this is just another headline about royal tension, consider this. Insiders claim that Harry's realization of his exclusion was immediate and painful. There was no buffer, no prior warning, and certainly no soft landing. The sting of absence was compounded by the awareness that even when he tried to navigate the system, subtle signs of disapproval were everywhere. From whispered comments to redirected attention, from seating arrangements to the deliberate omission of his name in ceremonial references. Every detail was a reminder. The space he once occupied, both physically and emotionally, is no longer his to claim. What comes next in this story is about escalation and consequence. Because exclusion alone cannot capture the full weight of the drama, there are ripple effects. Public perception, media narratives, the psychological impact on those directly involved, and the ongoing tension between duty and emotion. And at the center of it all is Princess Anne, whose decision, or even just her silent acknowledgement of the situation, has set in motion a series of events that the royal family may never fully control. So, what really happened behind those closed doors? Who made the ultimate decision? And how will Prince Harry respond to a reality where forgiveness appears to have been replaced with finality? These are questions that demand answers. But for now, we are left with the raw tension of a story still unfolding, a narrative that challenges our understanding of loyalty, power, and family. And it's here, at the precipice of understanding, that the first chapter of this dramatic tale begins. What occurred at that initial event, the one Harry was barred from, is more than a slight. It is the opening salvo in a conflict that touches not only the hearts of those involved, but the imagination of the public watching from a distance. Because in the world of royalty, what is left unsaid is often louder than what is declared, and absence carries a message sharper than any word. And yet, even as the door closes on one chapter of Harry's life, we sense the tension building. There are whispers of private conversations, subtle strategic moves, and unexpected allies or adversaries lurking in the shadows. The real story, the one no one is fully prepared for, is only beginning to emerge. What if the most humiliating moment for a prince wasn't a scandal in the tabloids, a public argument, or an explosive interview, but simply not being invited? Imagine receiving the silent treatment from an entire institution, feeling the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down on you, and realizing that your absence isn't an accident. This is reportedly what Prince Harry faced when he discovered that the latest series of royal events had gone forward without so much as a whisper of his presence. The invitation that never came was not a small oversight. In the meticulous world of the monarchy, every guest list is scrutinized, every RSVP a statement of allegiance, every chair placement a silent signal. These events, filled with pomp, pageantry, and centuries of inherited ritual, are far more than social gatherings. They are opportunities to assert hierarchy, demonstrate loyalty, and subtly communicate who belongs and who doesn't. And for Harry, being left off the list was not just a snub, it was a calculated exclusion. Insiders claim that the moment Harry realized he wouldn't be attending was both sudden and surreal. One minute, he was preparing for another appearance that he expected to share with his family. The next, he was confronted with the stark reality that his name was absent from official communications. No explanation, no personal note, just a void where his presence should have been acknowledged. Imagine the sense of shock, the immediate flood of questions, the uncertainty that comes when the rules of belonging seem to shift overnight. It wasn't merely a question of etiquette. In royal circles, invitations signify trust, recognition, and inclusion. To be excluded is to be publicly and painfully reminded of one's distance from power. Observers familiar with the palace's internal protocols point out that a royal invitation is never just about attendance. It is a subtle yet potent measure of status. Being omitted sends a signal not only to the excluded individual, but to everyone watching. This person is no longer part of the inner circle. The emotional impact on Harry cannot be overstated. For years, he navigated the complex web of royal expectation, balancing duty, public scrutiny, and personal freedom. He cultivated a persona of resilience and independence, often projecting confidence and self-assurance. But moments like this, moments of being quietly erased, strike at the core of belonging. The hurt is quiet, private, and relentless. It is the kind of wound that cannot be healed with public statements or interviews because it is not about perception. It is about presence, acknowledgement, and inclusion. The palace insiders describe a surreal sequence of events leading up to the realization. Staff members noticed that invitations were prepared meticulously for every guest. Cousins, distant relatives, dignitaries, even some friends of the family who had long-standing ties. Every name was accounted for, except his. Even those closest to Harry could not provide answers, caught in a web of secrecy and protocol. Each passing day, without clarity, magnified the humiliation. And yet, the decision was not random. It carried the unmistakable mark of intent, a deliberate and calculated exclusion. But why would this happen now? What could prompt such a precise and public form of omission? Analysts point to a combination of factors: the shifting dynamics within the royal family, Harry's increasingly independent public persona, and the heightened sensitivity around royal image in a time of scrutiny and transition. Every move is observed, every appearance calculated, and in this context, Harry's exclusion can be read as a signal, both to him and to the world, that certain boundaries are no longer negotiable. Consider the psychological impact. Imagine being present in every significant family event for years, only to be suddenly denied entry. The act itself is quiet. There is no confrontation, no public shame. Yet the effect is profound. Harry reportedly experienced a mixture of disbelief, hurt, and anger, compounded by the awareness that this exclusion was visible not just to him, but to the public and the media. Absence, in this case, speaks volumes. And the silence surrounding the decision only amplifies its power. The exclusion was felt not only emotionally but socially. Royals operate in a network where visibility equals influence. Missing events means missing connections, missing conversations, and missing the subtle reinforcement of alliances. It is not simply about who attends a party. It is about who is seen, who is acknowledged, and who is effectively removed from the narrative of royal life. For Harry, being left out represents both a personal slight and a strategic move by those orchestrating the events from behind the scenes. Yet, despite the sting of being uninvited, there are layers of complexity. Family relationships within the monarchy are never straightforward. Love, duty, loyalty, and rivalry intertwine, creating situations where decisions serve multiple purposes simultaneously. In this case, the exclusion may have served as both a protective measure, shielding the family from potential public embarrassment, and a statement of authority, signaling that certain lines cannot be crossed without consequence. And then there's the element of timing. The events Harry was barred from coincided with highly visible public appearances, carefully documented by media, with all eyes on the royal family. His absence was therefore unavoidable in the public record. Every photograph, every broadcast, every social media post amplified the message. Harry was not present. Observers could not help but notice, and insiders knew that this visibility made the exclusion even more powerful. It was a form of silent communication, carried out in plain sight. But it wasn't only William's decision. Sources suggest that Princess, and often described as the most disciplined and uncompromising of the senior royals, played a critical role in reinforcing the exclusion. Known for her meticulous attention to protocol and her unyielding loyalty to tradition, and reportedly reached a point where she intervened, quietly but decisively, ensuring that Harry would not receive the invitations he might have expected. Her involvement added weight and finality to the decision. When and says enough, it is rarely challenged. This brings us to the human side of the story. Harry, despite his public persona of strength, had to confront a painful reality. Family loyalty has limits. The exclusion was not just procedural, it was symbolic. It demonstrated that even the most cherished relationships are subordinate to the imperatives of tradition, authority, and the carefully curated image of the monarchy. For a man who has spent a lifetime navigating scrutiny and expectation, the sting of this quiet rejection was acute, reminding him that no status, no popularity, and no public support can override the decisions made behind palace doors. And there is irony in this exclusion. For years, Harry has been a figure of public fascination, often lauded for his independence and criticized for his candor. Yet, in the very spaces where he might have been most welcome, he was systematically erased. The very qualities that have defined his public identity, strength, courage, and authenticity, became irrelevant in the face of centuries-old traditions and the strategic calculations of senior family members. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that this was not a one-time occurrence or a casual oversight. The invitations, carefully crafted and intentionally selective, were a deliberate statement. They were designed to communicate, without a single word spoken, that boundaries had been drawn, that authority had been exercised, and that mercy or leniency would not be extended. The exclusion itself became a tool, a subtle but undeniable enforcement of rules and hierarchy. And yet, despite the calculated nature of the move, the emotional resonance cannot be understated. Harry reportedly felt a mixture of shock, hurt, and confusion, compounded by the realization that there was no straightforward path to reconciliation in the immediate term. Every detail of the event he would not attend, from the order of procession to the placement of every guest, was a reminder of what had been denied. It was a lesson in both the power of absence and the permanence of decisions made in the quiet corridors of authority. The broader implications extend beyond one prince. For the royal family, every action, every exclusion, every subtle shift in attention has consequences that ripple through history. Harry's absence, while deeply personal, also sends a message to the public. Rules exist, and they are enforced without favoritism. The monarchy, despite its traditions of loyalty and family, demonstrates that adherence to protocol sometimes outweighs personal relationships. What if the man who once seemed like a brother was no longer acting like one? What if Prince William, heir to the throne, began making decisions not as a sibling, but as a king-in-waiting, cold, calculated, and utterly uncompromising? This is the story insiders suggest is unfolding behind the polished curtains of royal protocol, where every choice William makes is as much about legacy as it is about loyalty, and every action sends a message that reverberates far beyond family dinners and ceremonial events. It is easy to misunderstand William's silence. To the casual observer, he is polite, composed, and measured. But those who understand the inner workings of the monarchy know better. Silence in the royal context is never neutral, it is strategic. When William chooses not to speak, not to intervene, or not to invite. It is a decision weighted with intention, consequence, and foresight. And for Prince Harry, this silence became a deafening declaration. The rules had changed, and the younger prince was now on the outside. The evolution of William from supportive brother to enforcer of boundaries is a story of transformation that has been quietly unfolding over years. The younger years of camaraderie, shared school experiences, and joint public appearances mask the subtle growth of responsibility, authority, and strategic awareness. William's life has always been about more than himself. It has always been about duty. And as he steps closer to the throne, that duty becomes sharper, less forgiving, and less personal. Every decision carries the weight of history, precedent, and expectation. This shift explains why William's handling of Harry's exclusion was not impulsive. It was methodical, it was precise, and it was designed to convey a single, unambiguous message. Boundaries have been drawn, and authority will be maintained, even at the cost of personal relationships. The events Harry was barred from were not mere social gatherings. They were stages for William to assert control over the family narrative, to demonstrate that the monarchy operates above personal grievances, and to signal that the era of leniency or informal negotiation is over. The analogy is stark. Imagine a captain of a ship navigating a storm, forced to make choices that will protect the vessel at the expense of personal connections. Every maneuver, every decision, is calculated for the survival of the mission. William, as the future king, is now steering the ship of the monarchy. Harry's independence, his public statements, and his sometimes unpredictable behavior are seen not as rebellion, but as potential threats to the stability of the institution. An exclusion, in this context, becomes a tool of control, not cruelty. Yet there is emotion behind the calculation. Those close to William note the tension between personal affection and duty. Reports suggest that he struggles privately with the human cost of his decisions. Publicly, he remains composed, measured, almost distant. Privately, there is reportedly a sense of disappointment, a recognition that family bonds can be strained when the crown demands obedience. It is a delicate balance. Enforce the rules, maintain authority, but avoid fracturing the family beyond repair. In this scenario, the stakes are unprecedented, and the margins for error are razor-thin. Insiders reveal that William's approach is not simply reactive, it is proactive. The younger prince's growing independence and media presence have shifted the perception of risk. Every interview, every public statement, every appearance is carefully analyzed for potential impact on the royal image. William's response is not emotional, it is strategic. And in this context, the decision to exclude Harry from certain events is not a slight. It is a calculated move to protect the institution, to define hierarchy, and to assert control over the family narrative. The public often underestimates the subtlety of these actions. Seating arrangements, guest lists, and even the order of processions carry meaning. The absence of a single individual, particularly a high-profile royal, sends a message as loud as any declaration. Observers may see only a missing name or an empty chair, but insiders understand the implication. Power has been exercised, lines have been drawn, and the younger prince has been reminded of his new place in the family hierarchy. But the stakes go beyond simple exclusion. William's decisions are part of a broader effort to stabilize the monarchy in a period of transition. With the passing of Queen Elizabeth, the monarchy faces a generational shift. Roles, responsibilities, and protocols are being renegotiated. William, positioned as the future king, is acutely aware that the actions he takes now will define the tone of his reign. In this context, allowing exceptions, bending rules, or appearing lenient toward Harry could be interpreted as weakness, a perception that William cannot afford. There is also the element of public perception. William is conscious not only of family dynamics, but also of how every action will be scrutinized by the media and the public. Every move is magnified, analyzed, and critiqued. The decision to exclude Harry is therefore layered. It is a family boundary, an assertion of authority, and a strategic communication to the world that the monarchy operates with discipline and consistency. In essence, it is leadership expressed through the quiet yet unmistakable power of omission. Yet, even as William exerts authority, there is an underlying narrative of restraint. Observers note that he does not publicly condemn, berate, or humiliate. The exclusion is executed with precision, without unnecessary drama, relying on protocol, timing, and subtle signals to communicate the consequences. In this way, William exercises power efficiently, ensuring that the message is clear while minimizing unnecessary conflict or spectacle. It is a demonstration of control that only insiders fully appreciate. The shift from brother to enforcer also underscores the psychological complexity of William's role. He is caught between familial loyalty and institutional responsibility. He must balance the personal desire to support and protect his sibling with the strategic imperative to safeguard the monarchy. Reports suggest that he is acutely aware of the long-term consequences of indulgence, and he has chosen to prioritize the institution over personal sentiment. This decision, while painful on a human level, reflects a mindset that is shaped by duty, legacy, and an understanding of the stakes involved. William's new rulebook is also characterized by zero tolerance for unpredictability. Where Harry once benefited from informal leniency, small allowances for personal expression, candidness, and unconventional behavior, those allowances have reportedly been reduced. The rules are now explicit. Participation requires adherence to protocol, respect for hierarchy, and recognition of the broader implications of every action. Deviations are no longer met with patience, but with strategic consequences, including exclusion. This rulebook is not merely about controlling Harry. It is about asserting a vision for the monarchy. William's approach reflects a desire to establish clarity, predictability, and discipline within a family and institution that has been repeatedly tested by public controversies, leaks, and internal conflicts. The new framework is designed to protect the monarchy, reinforce authority, and ensure that traditions are upheld, even when doing so requires difficult and emotionally charged decisions. And yet, despite the meticulous planning, the emotional toll is undeniable. Harry reportedly experienced a complex mix of shock, resentment, and disbelief upon realizing the full extent of William's new approach. The absence of formal communication, combined with the subtle signals and deliberate omissions, created a powerful sense of isolation. In the world of royalty, where every gesture carries weight, this enforced distance is both a personal blow and a professional statement. William's new rulebook also reveals the interplay between visibility and control. The exclusion of Harry from high-profile events serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It communicates a boundary to Harry, it signals authority to the rest of the family, and it reinforces the public perception that the monarchy is orderly, disciplined, and unified under William's leadership. The move is surgical in its precision, yet it carries profound emotional implications. It is power exercised not through confrontation, but through calculated absence. But perhaps the most significant aspect of this new approach is the alignment with Princess Anne. Known for her unwavering commitment to duty and her meticulous attention to protocol, and support provides William with both validation and reinforcement. Her quiet but firm stance reportedly ensures that the decisions regarding Harry's exclusion are both deliberate and enduring. When Anne says enough, William knows that his actions are not only justified but necessary, and that the authority of the crown is being upheld by more than just his own judgment. And so, William's transformation, from brother, friend, and co-parent figure to enforcer of boundaries and strategic guardian of the monarchy, is now complete. The rulebook is clear, the stakes are high, and the consequences for Harry are immediate and profound. His absence is no longer a temporary slight or a minor oversight. It is a statement of principle, authority, and foresight. Yet, as with any story of power and family, the narrative is far from over. The implications of William's new rulebook ripple outward, influencing decisions, shaping perceptions, and laying the groundwork for conflicts and revelations yet to come. And the younger prince, faced with a reality that is both public and intensely personal, must now navigate the consequences of a brother who no longer acts as simply a sibling, but as a king-in-waiting enforcing the rules. When most people think of Princess Anne, the image that comes to mind is often of a dutiful, unassuming royal, the queen's daughter, always composed, understated, quietly loyal. but in reality, and wields power in ways that few outside the inner circle can fully appreciate. Behind the scenes, she is known as one of the most disciplined, formidable, and uncompromising members of the royal family. And according to palace insiders, it was and who drew a line in the sand that would forever change Prince Harry's standing within the family. Imagine the intensity of a figure who, for decades, has navigated royal life with precision and unwavering adherence to duty, suddenly confronted with behavior she deems unacceptable, and has long been recognized as the monarchy's enforcer, a guardian of tradition, a silent arbiter of protocol, a voice of authority that, when exercised, cannot easily be ignored. She does not shout. She does not publicly criticize. Her power is subtle, surgical, and utterly effective. And in the case of Harry's exclusion from certain royal events, insiders claim her influence was decisive. Anne's intervention reportedly occurred after careful observation of the shifting dynamics between William and Harry. She noted the growing tension, the subtle breaches of protocol, and the increasing public scrutiny that accompanied Harry's independent life outside the monarchy. Where others might have hoped for reconciliation or leniency, and recognized a moment that demanded clarity and decisive action. And that action, sources suggest, was delivered not through public statement, but through private counsel, and a single word that changed everything. But why does Anne's opinion carry such weight? It's because she embodies the intersection of family loyalty and institutional authority. She is both blood and guardian of the crown, intimately familiar with the nuances of royal duty and the consequences of deviation. For Anne, rules are not suggestions, they are imperatives. She understands that exceptions, however well-intentioned, can erode authority and destabilize the carefully balanced hierarchy of the monarchy. Her reputation is built on consistency, precision, and a refusal to allow sentiment to undermine duty. And in this context, her involvement in the decision regarding Harry's exclusion elevated the action from a procedural choice to a moral and institutional judgment. Consider the emotional weight of this moment. Harry, accustomed to public scrutiny and private challenges, suddenly faced the unyielding gaze of a family member whose word carries as much authority as the crown itself. The realization that Anne had effectively endorsed, or even initiated, his exclusion would have been both shocking and profoundly sobering. For a prince accustomed to navigating complex social and institutional landscapes, the implication was clear. Even those closest to him, those bound by blood, could prioritize duty over personal loyalty. Sources describe Anne as having observed William's measured approach to exclusion and then adding her own authority to the process. Her intervention reportedly ensured that the exclusion was not temporary, not reversible, and not subject to negotiation. In other words, Harry's absence from certain events was no longer a matter of protocol. It had become a statement, backed by one of the most influential royals in the family. And because Anne rarely acts without careful deliberation, the message was unmistakable. Boundaries had been drawn, and they were non-negotiable. The subtlety of Anne's approach is as remarkable as its effectiveness. Unlike William, who operates with a combination of authority and public visibility, Anne's power is almost invisible, exercised through quiet signals, private conversations, and unwavering adherence to rules. She does not need to confront. She does not need to justify. She simply acts, and the consequences are felt. In Harry's case, her influence transformed what could have been a temporary familial disagreement into a decisive, enduring recalibration of his role within the monarchy. Imagine the psychological impact of such a dynamic. Harry, already navigating the complex intersection of public scrutiny, familial expectation, and personal ambition, now confronted the reality that one of the most disciplined and influential figures in the royal family had effectively drawn a line he could not cross. The absence of negotiation, the impossibility of dialogue, and the silent enforcement of boundaries created an environment of isolation and introspection. He had become, in effect, a prince without full access to the privileges, traditions, and networks that had once been his by birthright. Anne's role also highlights the broader mechanisms of power within the royal family. The monarchy operates on a delicate balance of visibility, authority, and tradition. Every decision, every signal, Every absence carries meaning. By stepping in decisively, and reinforced not only the rules governing Harry's participation, but also the underlying principle that authority is absolute when exercised judiciously. Her involvement ensured that the exclusion was not merely procedural but emblematic, a lesson in the consequences of stepping outside established boundaries. The decision reportedly carried emotional consequences for Anne as well. Sources suggest that she recognized the gravity of acting against her nephew, yet also understood the necessity. She is someone who has spent a lifetime balancing duty with personal sentiment, and in this case, duty prevailed. Her actions were not born of cruelty, but of a deeply ingrained understanding of what is required to maintain order, discipline, and cohesion within the royal family. The personal cost, while real, was secondary to the institutional imperative. What makes Anne's intervention particularly fascinating is the intersection of generational authority and personal judgment. She represents the older generation of royals who have long navigated the pressures of public life with discipline and discretion. Her perspective on Harry's behavior, independence, and public commentary reflects decades of accumulated wisdom about the risks of deviation from protocol. When Anne determines that a boundary must be enforced, it is not arbitrary. It is the culmination of experience, observation, and a clear understanding of consequences. It is also important to recognize the interplay between Anne and William in this scenario. While William enforces the exclusion as the future king, Anne's influence ensures that it is perceived as legitimate, enduring, and aligned with the broader principles of the monarchy. Their combined authority creates a dynamic in which Harry's absence is both unavoidable and inescapable. It is a demonstration of how power operates not through confrontation alone, but through the alignment of authority figures who share a vision of duty and order. The emotional resonance of Anne's role cannot be understated. To be confronted with the unyielding stance of a family member who is both kin and institutional authority is to face a profound test of identity, loyalty, and resilience. Harry, like anyone in such a position, would have felt the sting of exclusion compounded by the awareness that the decision was not impulsive, temporary, or reversible. It was deliberate, calculated, and reinforced by one of the most formidable figures in the family. Yet, as with any story of power and family, there is an irony here, and, often perceived by the public as understated or secondary, exercises influence with precision that eclipses the visibility of her siblings. Her interventions are rarely noticed, rarely sensationalized, yet they carry consequences that are immediate and enduring. In the case of Harry, her actions transformed a procedural decision into a personal reckoning, reshaping his place in the royal hierarchy without a single word spoken in public. The subtleties of this intervention also reveal a larger truth about the monarchy. Power is most effective when it is invisible, strategic, and disciplined. Public declarations, confrontations, or sensationalized gestures are unnecessary when authority can be exercised quietly, deliberately, and with foresight. Anne's involvement demonstrates that influence is not always loud. Sometimes it is felt most profoundly through absence, enforcement, and the silent weight of expectation. And as Harry absorbed the implications of Anne's intervention, he reportedly began to understand the full magnitude of his position. He was not simply being excluded from events. He was being reminded that the monarchy operates on principles that transcend personal loyalty, emotion, and even family bonds. The lesson was clear. In the architecture of royal authority, duty always supersedes sentiment, and the consequences of crossing invisible lines can be both immediate and enduring. Anne's decisive role in this chapter of royal history sets the stage for a new understanding of power, family, and consequence. It underscores the reality that the monarchy is not merely a collection of individuals bound by blood, but an institution governed by rules, hierarchy, and strategic judgment. Her actions ensured that Harry's exclusion was both undeniable and enduring, reinforcing the principle that authority, once exercised, is rarely reversed without consequence. And yet, as with any powerful intervention, the story is far from over. While Anne's line in the sand has been drawn and William's enforcement is clear, the repercussions for Harry, the family, and the monarchy are only beginning to unfold. Every reaction, every choice, every public appearance will now be filtered through the lens of this decisive moment. The consequences are immediate, visible, and poised to shape the narrative for years to come. And just when it seemed the exclusion could not gain more gravity, whispers emerged of how Harry learned the news, the subtle ways the message was conveyed, and the private reactions that would set the stage for an escalating confrontation. What and reportedly said, or didn't say directly, added a weight that could not be ignored, and it would echo far beyond the walls of the palace. What happens when a family feud isn't just about hurt feelings, resentment, or rivalry, but becomes a question of security, safety, and the very stability of a centuries-old institution? This is the uncomfortable reality insiders say the royal family is grappling with, a reality that turns personal conflicts into matters of operational concern. What may have begun as sibling tension or a clash of personalities has escalated into something far more serious, something that touches on power, protocol, and the safeguarding of one of the most scrutinized families in the world. Prince Harry's exclusion from certain royal events is often portrayed in media narratives as merely a continuation of personal disagreements, a story of estrangement, pride, and broken trust. But according to palace insiders, the stakes go far beyond hurt feelings. Once a high-profile family member begins to challenge public narratives, assert independence, and operate outside established protocols, the issue transforms from familial friction into a potential security concern. Every public appearance, every media interaction, every unsanctioned action could have implications not just for image, but for safety, logistics, and control. Imagine a scenario in which every step you take is observed, every action is recorded, and every deviation is analyzed for risk. That is the environment Harry has been navigating since stepping back from official royal duties. His independence, while empowering on a personal level, also introduces variables the monarchy must account for, variables that could expose vulnerabilities in security, protocol, and public perception. The palace operates under strict operational rules precisely to mitigate these risks, and deviations from expected behavior are not treated lightly. Security, in this context, is both literal and symbolic. On the literal side, the presence of high-profile individuals requires meticulous planning. Routes, access, protection details, and contingencies must be considered. Harry, a figure who commands intense media attention, presents unique challenges. His independent movements, public statements, and high-profile appearances require heightened awareness and sometimes create logistical and protective complexities. The decision to exclude him from certain royal events, therefore, is not simply punitive, it is pragmatic. It is a measure designed to control variables, ensure safety, and maintain order in a tightly orchestrated environment. Symbolically, security takes on an even more profound meaning. The monarchy relies on perception as much as protection. Maintaining appearances of unity, discipline, and order is critical to sustaining public confidence and institutional legitimacy. An unexpected presence, an unplanned interaction, or a perceived breach of protocol can be destabilizing. By controlling attendance and access, William and senior officials are not merely enforcing rules, they are safeguarding the stability of the monarchy itself. Every decision is a calculated attempt to minimize risk, preserve authority, and maintain the carefully curated narrative of power. The transformation of a family feud into a security concern also highlights the interplay between personal relationships and institutional responsibilities. On one hand, William and Anne act as family members, navigating emotions, expectations, and history. On the other hand, they act as stewards of an institution that transcends any single individual. Their authority is exercised not only over Harry, but over the mechanisms that ensure the monarchy functions smoothly under intense scrutiny. It is a delicate balancing act, where decisions carry both personal and operational consequences. Consider the psychological impact of this dual dynamic on Harry. He is caught between two worlds, the personal world of familial ties and the institutional world of monarchy. The exclusion is therefore not merely a matter of hurt feelings. It is a stark reminder that his actions, words, and presence are now subject to strategic evaluation. His autonomy, once celebrated as an act of personal courage, now becomes a potential liability in the eyes of senior royals tasked with preserving order. It is a lesson in the inescapable consequences of public visibility. Insiders describe the practical considerations that accompany this security-conscious approach. Every event, from public ceremonies to private gatherings, involves layers of planning: guest lists, seating arrangements, movement protocols, and risk assessments. Harry's presence introduces additional variables that require adjustment, often in ways that are invisible to the public eye. The decision to exclude him, therefore, is both a protective measure and a statement of control, signaling that the institution prioritizes stability over individual preference. Yet, as with all calculated moves, there is emotional collateral. The absence of reconciliation, the deliberate omission of invitations, and the controlled messaging all contribute to a heightened sense of isolation. Harry reportedly experienced a mixture of shock, frustration, and indignation, compounded by the awareness that his exclusion was not arbitrary but strategic. In the palace's calculus, his absence preserves operational order. In his personal calculus, it is a reminder of the growing distance between familial bonds and institutional necessity. The escalation from personal feud to security issue is also fueled by Harry's increasing visibility outside traditional royal channels. Media appearances, public statements, philanthropic initiatives, and independent projects all amplify his profile, increasing both interest and scrutiny. While these activities are empowering and noble, they introduce elements that the monarchy must account for. Security is not merely about physical protection. It is about predictability, control, and the mitigation of risk to both people and reputation. Every deviation is analyzed, every movement accounted for, and every attendance decision carries layers of implication. This dynamic also underscores the tension between perception and reality. To the public, Harry's exclusion may appear as family drama, a narrative of pride, estrangement, and personal conflict. But inside the palace, the conversation is framed around order, protection, and continuity. The decisions are deliberate, informed by risk assessment, and reinforced by senior authority figures who understand that appearances are inseparable from operational effectiveness. In this environment, personal grievance is secondary to institutional priority. Anne's role in this transformation cannot be overstated. Her intervention, characterized by precision, discipline, and unwavering authority, ensures that the shift from family feud to security issue is anchored in legitimacy. By reinforcing William's decisions and ensuring adherence to protocol, she provides a framework in which Harry's exclusion is not simply emotional. It is operational, strategic, and enduring. Her presence is a stabilizing factor, a reminder that authority within the monarchy is both distributed and deeply respected. But the situation is not static. Harry's reactions, private communications, and public responses introduce ongoing variables that require continuous assessment. Insiders describe a constant cycle of observation, evaluation, and adaptation. Every public statement, every event, every media interaction is analyzed for potential impact. Security, in this context, is a living, evolving consideration shaped by behavior, perception, and institutional priorities. The family feud has morphed into a complex matrix of operational decision-making, where human emotion intersects with procedural necessity. This evolution also highlights the broader consequences for the monarchy. Decisions made in the heat of personal tension ripple outward, affecting logistics, public perception, and internal cohesion. By treating Harry's exclusion as both a familial boundary and a security consideration, William and Anne reinforced the principle that personal relationships cannot undermine institutional integrity. It is a lesson in governance, authority, and the sometimes harsh reality of leadership. The emotional resonance of this shift is profound. Harry, accustomed to a certain level of autonomy and expectation, now faces the realization that his actions are being interpreted not just as personal choices, but as variables in a broader institutional equation. The absence of flexibility, the deliberate reinforcement of boundaries, and the operational framing of exclusion collectively underscore a stark truth. Even those closest by blood are not immune to the imperatives of duty and protocol. And as the monarchy navigates this delicate landscape, the tension escalates. The public may perceive a personal feud, but the stakes inside the palace are higher. Every decision, every omission, every subtle signal carries implications for stability, order, and perception. Harry's absence is therefore both a personal affront and a calculated operational decision. A reminder that the monarchy functions as a tightly controlled institution where family conflict intersects with security considerations in ways the public rarely comprehends. As Harry absorbs the implications of this transformation, insiders suggest he begins to understand the scope of his predicament. The family feud has shifted into a domain where authority, protocol, and institutional preservation take precedence over personal sentiment. Every step he takes, every appearance he makes, and every statement he issues is now scrutinized not only for what it reveals about him, but for what it implies about the monarchy's ability to maintain control and order. And just when it seemed the tension could not intensify further, another factor emerged: the subtle, powerful involvement of and in coordinating operational decisions alongside William. Her influence ensured that what began as a personal feud would now be treated with the gravity of a security protocol, reinforcing the consequences and amplifying the message that Harry's exclusion is both intentional and enduring. But what came next would take this dynamic to an entirely new level, a level where absence, protocol, and influence intersect in ways that would reverberate across the monarchy and set the stage for unprecedented revelations. The family feud was no longer merely personal. It had become an operational reality, a calculated move to safeguard the institution while reshaping the narrative for generations to come. What if the cruelest punishments weren't shouted across a room or splashed across headlines, but delivered in silence? In the world of royalty, where protocol rules every move, the absence of acknowledgement can cut deeper than the sharpest words. And insiders say this is exactly what Prince Harry began to feel. An invisible weight of exclusion, a series of calculated slights, and a quiet humiliation that, though subtle, was profoundly painful. The first silent humiliation came in the form of invitations, or rather, the lack of them. Harry, once central to family ceremonies, suddenly discovered his name missing from carefully curated lists. It wasn't a mistake. In the precise universe of the palace, mistakes of this magnitude rarely occur. Each omission, each oversight, or perhaps, more accurately, each deliberate exclusion, was a signal: you are no longer considered part of this inner circle. And in a family where appearances matter as much as blood, that absence speaks volumes. But it wasn't just about missing events. Observers describe moments when Harry's presence, or lack thereof, was conspicuously noted in public appearances. Cameras captured empty chairs, subtle gaps in processions, and sidelong glances from relatives. Every detail was a visual reminder of his exclusion. The silent message was amplified by the reactions, or intentional lack thereof, of those around him. The quietness wasn't neutral. It was a tool of subtle, psychological enforcement, designed to remind him of the shifting power dynamics within the family. Imagine the psychological impact. Harry, a man used to public attention and accustomed to navigating scrutiny, now faced the insidious sting of being deliberately overlooked. There were no arguments, no confrontations, only the weight of absence. Invitations unreceived, names unmentioned, interactions politely avoided. Each one compounded the last, forming a pattern that was impossible to ignore. In the royal context, where etiquette is both shield and weapon, this silence functioned as an invisible gauntlet, testing patience, composure, and resilience. Palace insiders suggest that these silent humiliations were layered, occurring in multiple spheres simultaneously. At private family gatherings, subtle gestures and intentional omissions reinforced Harry's new standing. At public events, media coverage highlighted absences without drawing attention to the orchestrated nature of the exclusion. Even minor details, seating arrangements, the order of introductions, or the lack of acknowledgement in speeches, served as calculated reminders. Every small act was a signal, a quiet lesson in both authority and hierarchy. Consider the interplay of emotion and calculation. William and Anne, the principal architects of this silent campaign, reportedly understood the power of subtlety. Confrontation is loud and temporary. Exclusion is enduring. Public arguments dissipate, but the memory of being overlooked lingers. Harry's reactions, private or public, became part of the ongoing calculus. The more restrained he remained, the more powerful the humiliation. Any visible response further highlighted the intentional orchestration. It was a delicate game of psychological chess, with stakes measured not in victory, but in influence and control. One particularly telling example reportedly occurred during a family ceremony that drew global attention. Harry was absent, of course, but the subtle ways in which his exclusion was reinforced were almost surgical. Siblings and cousins were positioned to maximize visibility while emphasizing his absence. Names and speeches were carefully ordered to reflect hierarchy. Even gestures of acknowledgement were withheld in ways that would be noticed only by those with intimate knowledge of protocol. The effect was unmistakable. Harry's absence was not a simple oversight. It was a calculated, highly visible statement. And yet, the silent humiliations carried an emotional complexity that made them almost unbearable. Unlike public confrontations, which offer the opportunity for rebuttal or defense, these omissions were private, subtle, and inescapable. Harry reportedly felt the tension in every glance, the weight in every moment, and the sting in every interaction or non-interaction. The absence of confrontation magnified the sense of vulnerability, leaving him to grapple with both the public and personal dimensions of exclusion simultaneously. The quiet nature of these humiliations also ensured that the broader public perception remained manageable. To outsiders, Harry's absence could be framed as a scheduling conflict, a personal choice, or an unfortunate coincidence. Internally, however, the message was unambiguous. The monarchy, through careful orchestration, leveraged silence as a mechanism of control. Absence became a weapon, subtle gestures became enforcements, and the line between personal grievance and institutional authority blurred. In addition to the visual and procedural slights, insiders note the emotional toll of indirect communication. Harry reportedly received updates about family events not through personal invitations, but through filtered channels, indirect notifications, or third-party accounts. The lack of direct acknowledgement compounded the sense of exclusion, creating a constant reminder of his new status within the family. In a system where attention and recognition are closely tied to influence and belonging, this quiet strategy was devastatingly effective. And then there were the public interactions. When Harry did attend official engagements, he reportedly faced subtle forms of marginalization. Delayed introductions, lack of acknowledgement by senior family members, and carefully staged photographs designed to emphasize distance. These actions, while seemingly minor, were part of a deliberate campaign to reinforce the boundaries set by William and Anne. Every step, glance, and gesture became a lesson in the consequences of overstepping, or simply existing outside the prescribed boundaries. The psychological impact of such consistent, quiet pressure is profound. Insiders describe Harry as experiencing a mix of frustration, confusion, and indignation. The humiliation is intensified precisely because it is not overt. It is calculated, measured, and ongoing. Unlike dramatic confrontations, these silent messages cannot be dismissed, countered, or easily contextualized. They linger, creating a persistent awareness of exclusion and reshaping the dynamics of family interaction in subtle but powerful ways. But the silent humiliations were more than just personal. They carried symbolic weight. In a family that operates on ritual, protocol, and hierarchy, these omissions communicated not only Harry's new standing, but also reinforced the broader principles of control, discipline, and authority. The public could see him absent, the family could feel the message, and the institution demonstrated its capacity to enforce boundaries without resorting to confrontation. Silence, in this case, became an instrument of both psychological influence and institutional power. The irony is striking. Harry, who has cultivated independence, transparency, and public engagement, is now subjected to a form of pressure that is invisible, private, and psychologically potent. The very qualities that once allowed him to flourish in the public eye, his candor, openness, and charisma, now expose him to subtle, enduring forms of exclusion. Every smile, every gesture, every public engagement carries the weight of absence and protocol, reminding him that personal identity and institutional expectation are often in conflict. And yet, these silent humiliations are not arbitrary. William and reportedly coordinate every detail to maximize effect without creating spectacle. There is a careful calibration of distance, omission, and procedural reinforcement, ensuring that every signal carries meaning while minimizing overt drama. It is a masterclass in psychological orchestration, where authority is exercised through absence, omission, and the meticulous management of attention. The cumulative effect of these orchestrated slights is powerful. Harry is made to feel the consequences of overstepping without a single raised voice, public argument, or sensationalized headline. The absence of confrontation amplifies the emotional impact, creating a sense of isolation, reflection, and recalibration. He is reminded, time and again, that the monarchy operates on principles that transcend individual preference, sentiment, and familial loyalty. And as Harry absorbs the cumulative weight of these silent humiliations, he reportedly begins to question not only his role within the family, but the very nature of his belonging. Every omission, every calculated absence, every subtle gesture reinforces a reality he cannot ignore. The monarchy has drawn a line, and he stands outside it. The personal sting is profound, the public implications far-reaching, and the psychological weight unrelenting. Yet, the story does not end here. While the silent humiliations establish a new hierarchy, they also set the stage for escalation. The private, invisible pressures are only one layer of a complex drama, one that now intersects with public perception, media narratives, and the ongoing calculations of authority, duty, and loyalty. Harry's next moves, and the reactions of those around him, promise to intensify the unfolding conflict in ways that no one outside the palace could fully anticipate. And just when it seemed the subtle strategy had reached its peak, insiders hint at a moment, a visual, a gesture, or a procedural nuance that would crystallize the humiliation and signal that the boundaries set by William and Anne were absolute. What happened next would escalate the tension further and leave a mark on the royal family dynamic that would not soon be forgotten. What happens when private family conflict becomes a global spectacle? What happens when every omission, every slight, every silent humiliation is picked apart by millions of eyes around the world? This is the reality Prince Harry now faces, as the royal feud that began behind palace walls exploded into a full-blown media storm. And insiders suggest that the timing, intensity, and consequences of this coverage were no accident. It was a perfect storm where personal drama, institutional authority, and public curiosity collided in ways that would leave lasting impact.